I saw a picture of an honest-to-God leprechaun once. Before you turn off the podcast forever, just hear me out. A few years ago, when I started on my spiritual journey, I took a bunch of different workshops to see what felt right with me. One of them was a Celtic shamanism course, taught by what I've gathered is an Elden one, that's been placed in the body of the most wonderfully pint-sized Irish woman I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. And she just casually dropped that piece of lore during a break time. And it was like as if she was just mentioning this really beautiful sunset picture she took or something. Amantha, you just can't do that to us. We're just children compared to you. I'm not even sure my prefrontal cortex is fully in place. Now, this happened on day 5 of 8 12-hour days. I was and always will be an overachiever and took the first workshop a few days before this course and just was downloaded with tons of stories and folklore. And we were doing deep introspective work for nearly a week. So the possibility of me hallucinating this entire situation is incredibly high. I'm not even sure I even took this workshop, honestly. But looking back at my bank account, that would like to argue for the truth. Amantha passed her phone around and sure shit, there the little bugger was, standing in front of a rock. The leprechaun was around a foot tall and nearly translucent against the long grass and rocks behind him. But you could see distinct facial features and the most impressive little manicured beard you've ever done seen. None of us said a word. I think most of us just grunted deep from our chests and stared up at Amantha with mouths agape, flies buzzing in and out, and the stale coffee breath saturated the sacred space. Incense had nothing on us that day. Amantha decided to up the ante and show us a picture of a fairy. While she was at it too, there was this shimmering figure in front of a bush with wings and human-like legs, like if a raindrop and a Barbie doll had a weird opalescent baby. It felt like I was on an acid trip, and I looked up from her phone to stare this fascinating human right in her face, and she just had this perfect, all-knowing smile lighting up her features. You remember those posters you could get from the Scholastic Book Fair? The ones with the glistening dolphins, sherbet-colored sunset backgrounds, and tropical hibiscus flowers surrounding all of these black and white wiggly lines. And everyone told you that the trick was to cross your eyes, but then also somehow at the same time unfocus them, and you'd see a larger image within the squiggles. I could never, ever get those to work, and I think it was all a part of a larger gaslighting scheme to buy knockoff Lisa Frank artwork. But there was something about looking at the phone screen and watching the leprechaun and fairy just appear that reminded me of those posters. My dearest, sweetest Amantha Murphy, if you ever listen to this, first of all, holy shit, hi. I am forever in your humble service, and I miss you something fierce. But secondly, my offer of moving into your front garden permanently under the guise of camping still stands firm, and restarting the commune with you is absolutely on the table. Just think of me as an exotic American garden gnome tucked up amongst your quaint Irish landscaping. Unless, do y'all got gnomes in Avery? Hey there, I'm Megan, a freelance paranormal researcher and investigator of over 20 years, and welcome to Paranormal Potpourri, the show where we mix the ordinary with the extraordinary to uncover the strange, the mysterious, and the downright weird. The scent profile for today is gumdrops and hyssop. take a deep breath, and let's get into it. Attempting to capture evidence of the other side and other entities of high strangeness has been one of the main tenets for paranormal research since its humble beginnings. If I can be completely honest for a second, what we all live and breathe for in the paranormal world is a hearty and healthy "I told you so" moment. Nothing feels better than shoving a phone with a picture of blurry contents into someone's face and going, "Those are legs. Do you believe me now?" Not that I would or have ever done that before. I'm definitely more tactful. I wait until a natural break in conversation and then hop in with my fucking bullshit. The reactions are usually less than stellar, but all that matters to me is being able to waggle my phone around and go, "And I put it on Instagram so you can look at it later." Spirit photography is a tried and true method within the paranormal scene. You'd be hard pressed to find someone that doesn't have a helpful trick or a piece of advice on how to get the perfect shot when you're investigating. The purpose of spirit photography is to try and attempt to capture images and ghosts and other potentially supernatural entities onto film or various digital media. Tech advancements have definitely helped and also have definitely hindered this process over the years, and yet the goal is still the same: crystallize the exact moment when something appears that wasn't there before. We hearken back to our history degree roots for a moment as we have a fond flashback to the brief overview of the spiritualism movement that I discussed in episode 2. Just like seances and spirit mediums came into popularity in the mid to late 1800s, so did spirit photography. It was incredibly popular during the U.S. Civil War and would have a resurgence later on during World War I in Europe. This period of great emotional turmoil and coming to terms with death on such a grand impersonal stage also coincided with probably the freakiest of freak culture, the Victorian Age. To put it squarely into context, the Victorian Age ranged from 1820 to 1914, obviously throughout the lifetime and eventual reign of Queen Victoria of England. She came to the throne in 1837 and died in 1901, so the trends of the era had some time to cultivate and mature. The Victorians embraced death with open arms. It was how you say it, très chic? Death was simply a part of everyday life, and you spent a great deal of time planning and designing your own funeral. Personally, my friends and I would spend hours and hours planning our insanely elaborate weddings to the actors who played the hobbits in Lord of the Rings when we were younger. Now, I can only imagine what kind of medications we'd all be on if we planned out our funerals instead. So it's not unreasonable to say that the Victorians, both the American and European branches, were head over heels with the idea of spirit photography. They had a deep, deep desire for the afterlife, and they wanted to see the spirit of a deceased loved one or a relative in a photograph with every fiber of their being. The timeline of photography seems ancient, but it's actually incredibly recent. The first practical photographic technique appeared in 1839 with the invention of the daguerreotype. A glass negative plate was placed opposite the viewfinder, and the image developed after a long exposure to a light source. Having a long exposure over the course of a few minutes made it pretty feasible for any sort of passing movement, like someone walking in the background perhaps, to leave a faint mark or a ghostly image on the final product. 1859 brought along glass plate negatives that could be layered on top of an existing photo to create a neat double exposure look. I was talking to the only photography expert that I know, and that happens to be my mom, And she said that the first thing she learned to do in her college photography courses was create double negatives. So the indoctrination starts young. Tricking your audience into thinking something is truly there when it's not is a tried and true theater kid sort of move. The evolution of spirit knockers and Davenport boxes led to new sorts of inventions and creations like Pepper's Ghost. Pepper's Ghost is an impressive illusion technique that's been used in theaters, cinema, amusement parks, museums, on television, and in concerts. An image of an object is placed off stage and it is projected onto a section of glass so it appears to be in front of the audience. If you'll recall, back in 2012, Snoop Dogg performed with Tupac at Coachella, and Tupac was projected on stage using Pepper's Ghost method. Or was he? Two photographers developed quite the reputation of producing exactly what the weirdos of the Victorian public wanted: ghosts caught on film. In 1862, an engraver turned amateur photographer named William Mumler published an image of his cousin. This wouldn't be strange at all if it wasn't for the fact that this particular cousin had been dead for 12 years already. Mumler claimed it was a total accident. He was staging a self-portrait session, and as he went through the process of developing the image, the ghostly apparition of his dearly departed cousin just sort of appeared, as they always seem to do. The timing of his discovery couldn't have come at a better time in the United States. Mumler took the grief and turmoil of the Civil War and used it to its full advantage, setting up a fairly profitable spirit photographer business in Boston and New York. Mumler's best-known capture happened in 1869. A widow named Mrs. Tundle came for a spirit portrait session. She lost her beloved husband a few years prior and hoped for a potential visit. Dressed in all black, she sat primly on the chair Mumler had set up for her, facing the camera directly, her eyes glinting with hope. As the photograph developed, Mumler realized something monumental. He recognized the alleged spirit in the photograph. A pale male figure stood behind Mrs. Tundle, hands placed lightly on her shoulders. His face looked down upon her with longing. The man bore a striking resemblance to the former President Abraham Lincoln. Now, I've seen this photo multiple times in my years as a historian and just purveyor of the internet, and I've always said that it looked like a shirtless Lincoln, and having studied it, no one can convince me otherwise. This is the hill I will die upon. Mrs. Tundle isn't Mrs. Tundle anymore because she's Mary Todd Lincoln. Mary Todd Lincoln isn't Mary Todd Lincoln anymore because she's Mrs. Tundle. Skip. Mumler's wife Hannah urged him to publicly identify Mrs. Tundle's husband because, like, what the fuck? Honest Abe is back and ready to bare-knuckle brawl y'all in the afterlife. Hannah Mumler was a known healing medium and ran her own spiritual business alongside aiding Mumler in his endeavors, so her overall involvement in this may not have been totally ethical in nature. Shout out to all of my amoral shamans out there listening. This is also in the heyday of the spiritualist movement, and Mary Todd Lincoln was very open in her use of mediums and spiritualists to speak with Abe, and before his assassination, she was well known to use them to speak with their departed son, Willie. So once the photograph went the 1860s equivalent of #viral, it was widely harumphed as a very well-constructed double negative. Others concluded that Mumler's story of not knowing who Mrs. Tundle was an elaborate cover-up, because what are the exact odds that old Honest Abe was just floating around the studio at the exact moment the image plate was exposed on a complete stranger? Those particular odds were put to the test in April of '69 when William Mumler went on trial to face charges of fraud and larceny. Of all people to testify against Mumler in a fraud case, P.T. Barnum stepped up to the witness stand. Barnum pulled a Houdini before Houdini was ever a twinkle in his mother's eye, using another well-known photographer, daguerreotypist, Abraham Bogardus. Step aside, Leah Fox Fish. A new name has entered the ring. Bogardus had made around 200,000 daguerreotypes in his entire career. Dude's unquestionably legit, okay? So Bogardus and Barnum created a picture that appeared to show the circus ringleader with the ghost of Abraham Lincoln, just to prove to everyone how easy it was to conjure up a spirit photograph. William Mumler was acquitted due to the lack of evidence provided by the prosecution. They just couldn't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was fabricating photographs. Repeat after me. We all know that classic saying, if the Abe Lincoln in the photo doesn't fit, you must acquit. Mumler went on to have a fairly successful photographic career, traveling between Boston and New York to capture the living and the dead onto film. He was frequently exposed as a fraud when people started to recognize some of the supposed spirits in publicized photos were still up and walking among the living. He was accused several times of staging quote-unquote ghosts of living people, and more fingers were pointed at Mumler, all claiming that he would break into homes to steal photos of deceased loved ones to use in his future double exposures. Now, imagine going downstairs in the morning, seeing that someone broke in, and you're doing a walkthrough of the house to see the potential damage or, what items were stolen, and you suddenly realize that your photo of Meepers and Peepums is missing from upon the mantle. Then you start hearing about this craze of photos with ghosts appearing in the background, and suddenly you see Meepers and Peepums showing up as see-through figures. Traveling across the pond, we're visiting the pioneer of spirit photography in Europe, William Hope. Hope was a member of a well-known spiritualist group called the Crew Circle, which was named after where he and the group members were from in England. Hope produced his first spirit photo in 1905, and by 1916, he was out and about in the public, duping everyone and their mothers into paying for fake ghost photos. One such dupester, is it dupey? Dupay? Like toupee, a Dupington, was named William Crooks. Apparently, everyone in this episode is named William. William Crooks had his photograph taken by Hope, and the mysterious figure of his wife appeared on the glass plate. Now, to understand something, William Crooks was the president of the Society for Psychical Research, and a close friend and colleague, Oliver Lodge, pointed out the very obvious signs of double exposure on the photograph. Lodge noted that his wife's image came from a copy of a wedding anniversary photo that was printed in the newspaper years prior. Did that knowledge sway Crooks into declaring Hope a fraud? Nah, my dog. Crooks was sipping from the same cup of delusional Kool-Aid as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. As a die-hard spiritualist, Crooks said, "Critics, shut the frickin' frick up. The photo was real, you goddamn idiots." Hope struck gold when he opened up his studio. Just like William Mumler capitalized on the tragedy of the Civil War, William Hope had the First World War and then the Spanish influenza to make his quote-unquote millions on. The general population was desperately looking for closure, a sliver of solace that their loved one was still around or had finally found peace. During times of great social unrest and discombobulation is when the snake oil salesmen make their greatest fortunes. 1920 started the trend of exposing William Hope as a well and true fraud of the utmost degree. An elaborate trap was set by Edward Bush, who used the fake name of Wood in a letter to Hope asking to sit for a spirit portrait. Bush included a photograph of his deceased son, who was in fact A, not his son, and B, totally very much still alive and kicking. The two men arranged an appointment, and Mr. Wood arrived to Hope's studio to get his portrait taken. And in what can only be described as an absolute miracle, William Hope produced a spirit who looked picture perfect, like Wood's dead son in the photo. What a crazy coincidence. And even more astounding, there was writing on the photo as well. Dear friend Wood was scrawled in ghostly handwriting. Or was it? Hope must have not bothered to inspect the deceased son's photo at all, because he definitely missed the part where it was scribbled Dear friend Wood across the bottom, and it made its way onto the final product via, wouldn't you know, double exposure. 1922 was when shit hit the fan hard for William Hope. A member from the Society of Psychical Research and paranormal investigator Harry Price arranged a sitting with Hope. Price secretly marked photographic plates and gave Hope a pack that had a particular logo on them that would ultimately transfer onto the final image. Hope was, at this time, completely unaware that Price tampered with any of the plates. Once the photos were developed, not a single one produced the marked logo, proving that Hope had switched out the plates for one of his own. Harry Price wrote this on the investigation. William Hope has been found guilty of deliberately substituting his own plates for those of a sitter. It implies that the medium brings to the sitting a duplicate slide and faked plates for fraudulent purposes. In true Kool-Aid Man fashion, making the ground rumble with every misconstrued footstep, here comes Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Oh, yeah. Oh, you thought we were done mentioning the patron saint of trifling bitches and hoes, didn't you? Oh, you thought wrong. Good day, sir. Arthur Conan Doyle led a mass resignation of 84 members of Esper under the assumption that Esper was opposed to spiritualism. No one puts ACD spiritualist fraudsters in a corner. ACD and his cronies threatened Price for years over writing more what they called sewage about spiritualists, and said if he continued, Price would meet the same fate as Houdini. Like, fucking damn, bitch. God, calm the fuck down. It was a misunderstanding on your part. Like, you're out here talking about getting punched in the stomach and rupturing appendixes. Like, who hurt you, Arthur? ACD staunchly refused to accept any piece of evidence that proved William Hope was a fraud and created yet another conspiracy against Harry Price, believing that he and his followers had set out to frame Hope and shit all over his findings like a bunch of Canadian geese in an open field. The case of William Hope and his crew circle deserves to be remembered today because it shows that it is practically impossible and futile to try to convince someone who wants to believe even in the face of quite convincing contrary evidence. That comes from a quote from Massimo Polidoro, a psychologist, co-founder, and the executive director of the Italian Committee for the Investigation of Claims of the Pseudosciences, in regards to his own personal research of William Hope and the crew circle. I had truly and sincerely hoped that this would be the last of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's nose being shoved into where it doesn't belong, but I'd be wrong on so many goddamn levels. Unfortunately, the inspiration for this entire episode comes from what's most likely his most famous claim to fame in the paranormal world, the Cottingley Fairies. The infamous Cottingley Fairies are a series of 5 photographs taken by cousins Elsie Wright and Frances Griffiths. The first 2 photos were taken in 1917, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle used them to illustrate his latest article on fairies called The Coming of the Fairies. In the article, he interpreted them as clear and undeniable evidence of supernatural phenomena. He called out all of those out there that claim that the fairy photos were fake, that they were all wrong, and he doubled down on his assertion of their genuine and truthful nature. If he attended a performance of Peter Pan, I think he'd break his own goddamn hands clapping as hard as he could to save Tinkerbell during the intermission break. So, how did all of this frivolous fairy fervor come to be? Well, 9-year-old Frances and 16-year-old Elsie played along a stream in a ravine near Elsie's home where they were told they weren't allowed to go. They claimed their total innocence, that they only went to see the fairies. Fae trap number 1. Lure dumbass British kids into the woods. I now understand how we won the Revolutionary War, 'cause you ain't catching us sleeping on spotting fairy traps now, are ya? The girls borrowed Elsie's dad's camera and came back within 30 minutes, triumphant that they had taken pictures of their fairy friends. If one of those fairy friends looked like Jareth, I'll eat my socks whole and uncooked. Elsie's dad reluctantly agreed to develop the photos that same day for the girls in his personal darkroom. The first photo that developed showed Frances laying down behind a bush with 4 dancing fairies out in the foreground. Dad immediately brushed it off, knowing that Elsie had an artistic side and must have made those fairies herself. He had also taught her the basics of framing a photograph and knew she had an eye for these sort of things. Frances, who grew up in South Africa, sent a letter to her friend back in Cape Town detailing her life and new adventures in England. She included the photo of her with the fairies, and she wrote on the back, "It is funny. I never used to see them in Africa. It must be too hot for them here." Or they are the perfect snack for a hyena. Have we considered that? 2 months later, the girls snuck away with the camera and had another supposed encounter with their fairy compatriots. A photo showed Elsie this time sitting on the lawn holding her hand out to a 1-foot-tall gnome. Elsie's dad was still convinced it was a prank and refused to give out his camera to the cousins for future visits. Elsie's mother, Polly, on the other hand, was sold on the validity of the photos. I guess hobbies and pastimes are hard to come by in Britain. Ironically enough, Polly attends a lecture of fairies a few days later. Like, what are the fucking chances of that timing working out? She brought the photos of Elsie and Frances with her and showed them to the lecturer, who took the photos back with him and displayed them at the next Theosophical Society annual conference. I know what you're thinking. What in God's name is Theosophy? You know, not every interest or hobby needs a name. We can just agree to be like the Explorers Group or the Babysitters Club. Theosophy's main belief is that humanity is undergoing a cycle of evolution, speeding straight towards what they consider to be perfection. I think I've already achieved their ultimate goal. I see it every time I look in a mirror. The leading member of the society, Edward Gardner, took a shine to the potential of this fairy scenario. The fact that 2 young girls had not only been able to see fairies, which others had not, but had actually for the first time ever been able to materialize them at a density sufficient for their images to be recorded on a photographic plate, meant that it was possible that the next cycle of evolution was underway. Step to the side, dental morphology and anthropology. We've got a new categorization in human evolution. Fairy photos. To my college anthro professor, who once used a human skull as a microphone during a lecture because, and I quote, "Our heads are great sound amplifiers. Please never change. You are the best." I also would like to say I'm sorry for blatantly falling asleep in the front row. As you know, 9 a.m. is a rough time to discuss human evolution. Gardner took the photos and glass plate negatives to Harold Snelling, a photography expert. Snelling agreed that the photos and their negatives were, as he said, genuine, unfaked photographs. Now, listen to that again. Genuine, unfaked photographs. Snelling didn't come right out and say that there were actual fairies, just that the photographs were of whatever was in front of the camera at the time. If that isn't a solidly vague statement of undeniable proof of fairies. Take one good fucking guess as to who helped Gardner get a second opinion from the Kodak company. Oh, yeah. God, there's so much drywall. How do you keep fixing these walls so quickly? That's right. The defender of all things unexplained and extraordinary, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In a shocking twist of events, Kodak declined to issue any sort of certificate of authenticity for the photographs. Gardner and Arthur Conan Doyle were just a little sus over the opinions of some of Kodak's techs after hearing one of them say, "Well, after all, as fairies couldn't be true, the photographs must have been faked somehow." Gardner and Conan Doyle took those three opinions and made it a 2-1 decision in favor of the authenticity and validity of the Cottingley fairies. 4 out of 5 dentists also think this is all bullshit. Gardner was sent on a solo mission in 1920 to visit Elsie Wright and investigate the alleged fairy hideout in her backyard. Elsie's dad told Gardner he thoroughly searched the woods and house for anything incriminating and happened to find absolutely nothing. I can only assume that Elsie's dad's testimony sounded a little bit like this, like, "I stomped around in the high grass for what seemed like hours, and all I could hear were these high-pitched shrieks, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary." What he didn't know was that was the darkest day in backyard fairy history, second only to the day little Bunny Foo-Foo relapsed. Using that as his only form of proof, Gardner declared that the family was honest and truthful in their recollection of the events from 3 years prior. Gardner made several more visits to the family land, and on one particular trip brought Elsie and Francis their own cameras and instructed them to document what they saw under what he said was strict guidelines, and what I say had to be something along the lines of "just go fucking nuts, girls." And to no one's surprise, neither mine or yours by this point, the girls came back with photos of them interacting with fairies. So a total of 5 photographs of the girls, fairies, and other fae-like creatures were published from 1917 and the photo sessions from 1920. You have Alice and the Fairies published in July of 1917. This is going to be the most iconic photograph of the set. You have Iris and the Gnome from September of 1917, and the next 3 from August of 1920. Alice and the Leaping Fairy, fairy offering flower to Iris, fairy sunbath, elves, etc. The names Iris and Alice came from none other than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle when he published the photos alongside an article he wrote called Fairies Photographed in December of 1920. Again, this is the man that wrote Sherlock Holmes, the iconic Hound of the Baskervilles, the several Pips, I think. I don't know. I'm trying to remember what the BBC Sherlock episode had, just drunk things with phone chargers. But fairies photographed is the best you could do. I'm so glad he's dead. I really am passionate about keeping history alive, but some people don't need the limelight like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He makes me so irrationally upset. I'm going to move on. I can feel my heart rate increasing the more I think about this. The media was enthralled for 60 seconds after these were published. One noted that the coverage of the Cottingley fairies was mixed, a combo of both embarrassment and puzzlement. Historical novelist and poet Maurice Hewlett critiqued the frenzy stirred by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle with, and knowing children, and knowing that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle has legs, I decided that the Miss Wrights have pulled one of them. I will die by the fact that we need more roasting pros in today's society. My God. By 1921, Elsie and Frances were so over the fairy nonsense. They claimed to no longer be able to see or interact with the fairies after their last photo session. Teens, am I right? Gardner made one last visit and swore that he was surrounded by fairies everywhere he went, and yet no photographs. That's pretty interesting. By the 1980s, Elsie and Frances fully admitted that they had faked the photos. They crafted cardboard cutouts of fairies that they had found in a popular children's book and used Elsie's knowledge of photography to frame the fairies in different poses. Elsie stood by the fact that each photo was created by human hands. Frances was much more reluctant to give up the ghost on photo number 5, the fairy sunbath. Their stories altered as time and multiple interviews went on. The cousins would say that rational people don't see fairies in one article and then go on TV the next day and say that the photos were faked, but they for truly and for really saw fairies with their own eyes. Elsie and Frances finally confessed that they were just too embarrassed to tell the truth after they had managed to successfully fool Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. From Elsie, 2 village kids and a brilliant man like Conan Doyle, well, we could only keep quiet. And from Frances, I never even thought of it as being a fraud. It was just Elsie and I having fun, and I can't understand to this day why they were taken in. They wanted to be taken in. I guess it's true what they say. If you believe in something hard enough, it will eventually become your reality. I believe I'm a millionaire and Harry Styles is in love with me. I believe I'm a millionaire and Harry Styles is in love with me. I believe I'm a millionaire and Harry Styles is in love with me. I believe I'm a millionaire and Harry Styles is in love with me. I believe I'm a millionaire and Harry Styles is in love with me. In today's society, we take photographs literally for granted. Entire weekends are dedicated to getting your high school senior portraits done. Huge portions of wedding budgets are set aside for the hopes of getting the perfect shot during the ceremony. Someone managed to patent a selfie stick, for crying out loud. Back when photography first came out, it was cheaper for someone to sit for a photo than the multiple sessions it would take to paint a portrait. The stalwart facial expressions came from having to sit still for multiple minutes in a row to avoid any blurring from movement with the long exposure necessary for early cameras. It also came from an irrational fear that cameras stole parts of your soul. And well, that's another episode entirely. Some photos, though, show movement of the subjects, and some are in perfect crispness, almost like they're unmoving in real life. In all honesty, the only photograph most living in the US and Europe would have done was when they weren't, living. Post-mortem photography became a way for the middle class to remember their dead. This practice was originally restricted to those in the upper class who could afford it. Many early photographers advertised that they could come photograph the deceased within an hour's notice of their death, and they charged around 25 cents or about $9 today. There were two styles of poses that became en vogue with postmortem work. You've got posthumous mourning. The corpse would be positioned with their eyes pried open, posed often in a chair as if they were still alive. You can only imagine that getting their eyes opened was considered quite the task. This you can effect handily by using the handle of a teaspoon. That was some advice from photographer Charlie Orr back in 1873. A phenomenon called tache noir, or black stain, could be picked up in a photo depending on how close the photographer got. Eyes that remained open after death dried up, and the exposed corneas turned a sort of reddish orange to blackish color. Could it be meepers? Could it be a demon? The world will never know. The other posing style was called mortuary. The corpse, with their eyes thankfully closed, would be laid out on the deathbed or in a coffin or a casket. The deceased and their ultimate beautification became the main point of pride for the family and the photographer. You had your ornate caskets, lush floral displays, elaborate wreaths that were put out on display. Great effort was put towards making and posing the deceased in such a way that they seemed alive. A photograph of the dead certifies, so to speak, that the corpse is alive. As corpse, it is the living image of a dead thing. Quote by Roland Barthes. Many corpses were surrounded by remaining family, pets, toys, or their favorite objects. This was called a mourning tableau, and it was a way to create a long-lasting, evocative image of the deceased. It wasn't glamorous work to get corpses posed and stylized. There were things called hidden mothers, which was a trick to get living children to sit still and stay calm. The mother was hidden in frame under a cloth, holding the child in place. Mothers would often pose holding their deceased child or hide behind living siblings with the deceased in their arms. Some photographers tried their hand at artistry and attempted to paint eyeballs on closed eyelids, both on the physical corpse and once the photo was developed. As you can probably imagine, this technique had varied levels of success. In an 1873 edition of the Philadelphia Photographer, detailing the challenges of posthumous photographs, Albert Southworth shined some disturbing light on this practice. If a person has died and friends are afraid that there will be a liquid ejected from the mouth, you can carefully turn them over just as though they were under the operation of an emetic. You can do that in less than a single minute, and every single thing will pass out, and you can wipe out the mouth and wash off the face and handle them just as well as if they were well persons. Now, I thought holding back my friend's hair as they yartzed was commendable, but awards, medals of honor, Nobel fucking Peace Prizes. These photographers deserve as much recognition and rewards that we can bestow upon them. Oh my God. Like I mentioned earlier, the Victorians had quite the morbid curiosity around death. Just like planning their funerals, figuring out how to set the stage, so to say, for these photos was as equally as important. These photos were cherished images, future heirlooms, and the rituals set around them were deeply appreciated by everyone involved. It's a taboo concept to us in this day and age to stage and photograph the dead. I know some people who photograph the floral arrangements and picture boards at the funerals for family to look at later on and remember. But the idea of pulling out your phone and snapping a quick pic of Peepers in his favorite suit and tie is tantamount to swearing in church or flipping off a baby in public. You just don't do it. Or if you do it so no one notices. A friend of mine has what he calls a collection of last photos of family members on his cell phone. They're a bit shocking once your brain turns over exactly what you're looking at, but they're also sort of touching and a little bit sweet. The final look at a loved one before you aren't able to ever again. I long to have such a memorial of every being dear to me in the world. It is not merely the likeness that is precious in such cases, but the association and the sense of nearness involved in the thing. The fact of the very shadow of the person lying there forever. I would rather have such a memorial of one I dearly loved than the noblest artist's work ever produced. That is poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning in a letter to her friend Mary Russell Mitford from 1843. A discussion over whether or not orbs in photographs nowadays could be considered paranormal would result in a full-out bare-knuckle dust-em-up among paranormal researchers and investigators alike. It is our rippling red cape to our snorting and huffing paranormal bull. A majority of orbs caught on camera, pictures, and videos are environmentally triggered, meaning it's just a cloud of kicked up dust or dirt that is reflecting back the flash of the camera. Do not get me started on flying bugs and spider webs. We'd be here all ding dang damn day. Do I necessarily always dismiss orb photos or videos as not real? No, sorry for that non-committal response, but I need context to what the conditions, the locations we're in, the humidity levels, the weather outlooks, broken windows, everything. All of those play a huge role in the event of an orb sighting. One of the first things I can remember from a psychology class in high school is that the human brain cannot comprehend the concept of nothingness. Your brain will always make something out of nothing because nothing does not exist. The limit doesn't exist. For you, Glenn Coco. You'll often hear or see the word pareidolia get tossed around paranormal circles quite frequently, not unlike a hacky sack on a college campus. Pareidolia is a psychological phenomena that causes people to see patterns or deeper meaning in ambiguous stimuli like clouds, rock formations, or your everyday objects. Those Facebook posts you see about someone's aunt's dog walker's coworker who toasted a piece of bread and lo and behold, there was baby Jesus staring back up at them, that'd be a fine and quite frankly tasty example of pareidolia. Question. Does spreading "I can't believe it's not butter" on a piece of toast with a burnt-on image of the Virgin Mary or the baby Jesus negate it entirely? Or does it double down on the unbelievability of the moment? Because this is my podcast and I can say whatever I want, I was one of the popular kids back in middle and high school because I spent most of my time neck deep in the world of stop motion animation. I was damn good at it too. Making sculpey clay figurines and moving them in minute motions and gestures, taking a photo after each adjustment. 6,500 photos later and we've gotten 10 seconds of our movie complete. Honestly, seeing Ben Wyatt from Parks and Rec hold up his clay figurine and go, "Depressed?" I'm the furthest thing from depressed. I mean, look at what I've accomplished. Do you see him? Do you think a depressed person could make this? No. Was a real eye-opening experience for me. So you could say I have a lot of personal experience and some expertise in posing and positioning fairly immobile objects. On a couple of investigations I've been on, I have used long exposure camera techniques and I have had mixed results on it. The one time that I've really been blown away by what was captured with this technique was when I was at Waverly Hills Sanatorium, and we had another investigator along with us who specialized in long exposure work. He came along and offered to take our pictures in different areas of the building. I met up with him down in the infamous body chute, and after a few different typical paranormal investigator poses, I continued on with the evening. A few weeks later, I got a message from one of the investigators who went to Waverly, and she had received the pictures. One had a note attached to it. Hey, check out what's in the background of Megan's photo. Could be legs? I mean, weirder sentences have been written. You can believe me on that one. I opened up the photos that she sent on my phone, and I zoomed in the area behind me, and sure enough, a pair of stately gams were making their way downtown, walking across the width of the body chute. Everyone who was with me that night was behind the camera because we were on our way out of the body chute area when the investigator photographer showed up, so I can definitively state it was not human interference. I will post the pictures on the Paranormal Potpourri Facebook group so you can make your own determination. Just as trying to recall, this was back in 2019. I believe the exposure length was right around 15 to 20 seconds, just long enough to worry about your eyeballs drying out if you had to keep them open for a second longer. Techie noir, not with this girl. In the end, quite like most of the other topics we've talked about before, spirit photography, postmortem portraits, and spherical ghosts all stem from a deep manifestation of want. Wanting proof of the other side, wanting to know if a loved one is still around, wanting something shocking to show others. Joe Diffie said it perfectly in his 1993 number 3 hit on the Billboard Hot Country Songs with, "Well, I ain't afraid of dying, it's the thought of being dead. I want to go on being me once my eulogy's been read. Don't spread my ashes out to sea, don't lay me down to rest. You can put my mind at ease if you fill my last request. Prop me up beside the jukebox if I die." Thank you as ever for sticking around for this episode of Paranormal Potpourri. You can find out more at my illustrious website, www.alreadyhereinvestigates.com. If you are wondering where I will be over the next couple of months, check the Apple AirTag that you have in my car, I'm assuming. Or if you are interested at all and you hear this in time, make your way over to Houghton Lake, Michigan this weekend. So that would be Saturday, March 8th. That I will be at Potograph's Parafest 6, hosted by a good friend of mine, Tim Mail, and his wife, Lauren Mail. And they got the scheduled event sent out today, and I'm losing my mind. I'm very excited. We've got Dustin Perry's going to be there. Shane Pittman. Oh my God. There's lunch as well. It goes to a good cause. They are raising money for the local Roscommon County Animal Shelter. And if you would like, you can send me a message on how you can donate. You can send a message of good luck because I will be road tripping with my parents. So I will see who survives that. And we get to hang out with a whole bunch of spooky people in honor of a very good boy, Mr. Murray. Shout out to the artists on Pixabay that I use for the wonderful sound effects in today's episode. My prowess in technology keeps getting better and better. And thank you to the artists that I used for my intro and outro and segue sections. Oh my God. Oh God, I hauled ass back to the studio, and the paranormal police are coming for me. Just quick mention, I forgot to say something about the Warrens. Ed and Lorraine Warren, they were big proponents of spirit photography. They would take their cameras to every investigation. The photograph I talked about, the Amityville Horror House, that was fucking bullshit. They were big proponents of it, and if this is the last time you hear from me, tell my best friend I love her, and oh my God, the SWAT team's here.